Hey man, how's it going?
Any follow-up?
Wanna have a donut?
Good to see you, dude. Hey, yeah, I love a donut, man. Thanks.
Awesome.
Hmm.
What have you been up to?
Well, I actually just got out of this meeting with Volkswagen.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. They want us to install a system that's actually going to cheat the emissions testings for the EPA.
And which vehicles are these for?
That's going to be for the Volkswagen Golf, the Beetle, the Touareg, the Sportswagen, and the Passat. All those vehicles, they want us to basically just make some system that we can cheat these EPA tests.
Really?
Yep, it's crazy, man. It's going to be a lot of money and probably a lot of hours working, but it's going to be worth it.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, man. Let's go. Good morning, Volkswagen. Thank you for hiring Bosch to be your engineering and manufacturing firm for this project. Today, we'd like to go over some of the software that we developed to help you with your emissions testings. Would you have any questions off the start?
Not immediately off the bat. I think we're just interested to see how this is going to work.
Sure. So I'll give you a little glimpse of some of the logic functions that we use for our testing methods here, and you can see that there's a lot that went into this programming, and we really put a lot of time and effort into it. To begin with, we have the testing rig so that we basically know how the EPA will test using a dynamometer, which puts the vehicle through basically any different setting that it may be out on the road. And as you can see, we used all of these logic functions to really get a good idea of how we can make sure that any scenario will be covered. And you need to know essentially that there's a test mode that's going to be covered by the EPA, and this programming will cover that.
That makes sense. How does the system know when it's in test mode?
Well, there's three different ways that it knows. Primarily, the main three are the accelerator is pressed beyond test parameters. Second is the revolution counter exceeds test parameters. And the third is the steering wheel is turned at the same time as the accelerator is being pressed.
So when these three conditions are met, the car knows it's in test mode.
Correct.
Have you tested it to make sure it's 100% workable?
We took it on the road, and formal emissions tests were reduced from this testing, and we are fairly certain in the results of our tests.
I think that'll work.
We, the U.S. government, are charging Martin Winterkorn with conspiracy and wire fraud in relation to Volkswagen's efforts to cheat on U.S. diesel emissions tests. Winterkorn, you have defrauded the U.S. and violate the Clean Air Act and federal laws designed to control air pollution. The indictment unsealed today alleges Volkswagen's scheme to cheat its legal requirements went all the way to the top of the company, you. These are serious allegations and will prosecute this case to the full extent of the law.
Your Honor, my client denies any knowledge of the scandal that misconduct on such a scale was possible in the Volkswagen Group. He had no knowledge of the company's software scam, and he was not informed early and clearly about the measurement problems.
Dr. Winterkorn, in the late July of 2015, you were given a detailed briefing about the situation in the United States, more than a month before the company admitted wrongdoing. The report included a PowerPoint presentation to provide you with a clear picture of how Volkswagen was deceiving U.S. regulators and the potential consequences of being caught. You agreed to a plan of action that involved continuing to conceal the existence of defeat devices. Even more, as early as May of 2014, you were informed about a study conducted by the International Council on Clean Transportation, a non-governmental organization that showed some Volkswagen vehicles emitted higher nitrogen oxide levels, especially those of atmospheric pollutants. Emissions during normal driving then registered during treadmill tests. Federal prosecutors also allege that in July of 2015, meeting with you, you approved and continued concealment of cheating software from U.S. regulators.
Your Honor, my client asked himself if he misread any signals, and he's searching for satisfactory answers on how the decision to cheat was made and why. He is an engineer, he loves detail, and this was his personal brand, which is why everyone is asking and saying, Winterkorn must have known everything, but that is not the case. My client first learned that the emission problem in the U.S. were the result of the use of illegal software, a so-called defeat device. In this September 2015, just as the scandal broke, he was informed at 6 p.m. on Friday, September 17, that the U.S. would charge Volkswagen with emission violations minutes before the Environmental Protection Agency published its official notice of violation. And it wasn't until Tuesday, September the 21st, that he became aware of the full scale of the diesel affair. Then, nearly 11 million vehicles worldwide were affected.
As CEO, I take political responsibility for the scandal. I'm a realist, and I have to come to the conclusion that my name will always be tied to this emission scandal.
Good evening, I'm Annabelle Wolf. Tonight on 59 Minutes, we will be following a breaking story of what appears to be a scandal concocted by Volkswagen to rig the results of their emissions testing to pass regulation requirements their vehicles did not actually meet. We will be interviewing Philip Gross, Director of the Air Enforcement Division of the Environmental Protection Agency. Philip, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on such short notice.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Philip, now what can you tell us about this rapidly developing scandal?
Well, what I can tell you is that on September 18th, Volkswagen of America was issued a notice of violation of the Clean Air Act. This was following an investigation that found that Volkswagen installed defeat devices in 2009 to 2015 light-duty vehicles that would bypass vehicle emission systems tests in direct violation of Part A of Title II of the Clean Air Act.
And what is the Clean Air Act?
Clean Air Act is a federal law that controls pollution. It's intended to improve the nation's air quality and ozone layer by regulating the risk of emissions and applies to many sectors from manufacturing to automobiles.
Okay, and for the most part, we all drive cars, of course. And what do we have to worry about with vehicle emissions?
Well, for starters, these emissions by Volkswagen vehicles are not your average emissions. Most vehicles emit about 4.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide a year. Volkswagen vehicles are emitting 40 times that number. The emission greatly increases the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and an excessive amount of greenhouse gases traps too much of the sun's heat in the Earth's atmosphere and excessively warms the Earth.
Wow, okay. And are there any other costs of excessive emissions that may occur?
Well, vehicle emissions also contribute to sea level rise and flooding and droughts. Vehicle emissions contribute to acid rain as the polluted emissions mix with other particles in the atmosphere. These impacts to the environment have a trickle-down effect, and they can create problems such as loss of habitat for animals, soil contamination, increased flood risks, other things like that. And on a more personal level, these emissions are being emitted at street level. So people, animals, anyone that's on the street walking by are inhaling these emissions, and increased emission inhalation means bad things for both humans and animals, can lead to things such as asthma and increased risk of cancer.
Wow, that is terrible. Are there not any tests that these vehicles go through to make sure that they're not violating the Clean Air Act?
We do put all vehicles through a rigorous set of emissions tests using a dynamometer and highly trained personnel. We do this to ensure that the vehicle performs in a variety of settings in compliance with the Clean Air Act and EPA standards. That being said, at this time we're not quite yet certain how, but it appears Volkswagen vehicles were installed with a sensor that could tell when certain emissions tests were being ran, and this sensor would switch the vehicle to a mode in which emissions were controlled as appropriate with EPA standards.
Wow. And what will be the next steps in this ongoing story?
Likely what we're going to do is to look to implement defeat device screening protocols in our emissions testing and compliance oversight in the future. Volkswagen may be pressed with legal action by the Department of Justice as well if the data warrants it. For our part, we will continue to do all that we can to regulate emissions that are put into an already overloaded atmosphere.
Okay. Philip, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Of course, thank you for having me.
That's it for us tonight on 59 Minutes. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you again tomorrow night.
Thank you. This is the first annual report of Volkswagen Group, where I have the privilege of speaking to you as the chairman of the board of management. On behalf of Volkswagen Group, I would like to apologize to you, our shareholders, that the trust placed in Volkswagen has been broken. We are gradually making progress. This is reflected, among other things, by the financial key performance indicators for the last fiscal year. We delivered almost 10 million vehicles to customers in 2015 and grew sales revenue by over 5% to $213 billion. The operating result, which ran at $12.7 billion in the previous year, was negative $4.1 billion. at 16.2 billion, the lion's share of special items accounted for by contingency reserves for the diesel issue, including ongoing technical and customer-related measures, repurchases, and legal risk. Without the special items, we would once again have been able to talk about a successful year overall. Everyone at Volkswagen is working most diligently and with great commitment to rebuild the high esteem that this group rightly enjoyed for so long. The diesel issue has clearly overshadowed much in recent weeks. The Volkswagen Group has firm resolve and the strength to master the difficult situation we find ourselves in with its own resources. Our mission is to come up with the right answers to the big issues of the future, namely e-mobility, urbanization, and digitalization. As far as Volkswagen is concerned, 2016 will be a year of transition, a year when we lay the foundations for the future. Because it has encouraged us to set the right priorities and speed up overdue change. And Volkswagen, and because we will succeed in making Volkswagen a better company with the measures we are now putting in place. Which is why this year I'm asking above all for your continued loyalty to Volkswagen, in spite of the present pressures, and hope you remain at our side as we make the journey into the future. Thank you.
Oh, we have someone in our group who was personally affected by the Volkswagen emission scandal, and here are my questions to you, Stan. Well, can you tell me who you are and what personal experience you have with the Volkswagen emission scandal?
Sure. So my name is Stan Spivey. In early 2011, I bought a Volkswagen Jetta TDI, brand new. And it was a few years into that the Volkswagen, specifically for the turbo diesel injection engines, came out that they were manipulating the false emissions data. And that eventually turned into a buyback or a retrofit program.
What made you buy it? What made you select this type of vehicle?
It was mostly, so I moved to the Tampa area, and I lived quite a distance from work. It was 38 miles one way, and I drove a truck at the time, so I was only getting 15 miles per gallon. The Jetta got significantly better gas mileage. There were the other alternatives at the time. There wasn't like a nice Tesla Model 3 or anything like that. I didn't necessarily trust the battery technology at the time, and I didn't really like the look of like a Prius style vehicle. So it had fuel economy. It was, instead of 15 miles per gallon in a truck, I was getting like 42 on the highway for the diesel. The engine life, typically a combustible engine will last you like 150,000 miles. The diesel will last you like 300,000. So it was going to last me probably a decade. And then finally, at work, I was in some development stuff where I was getting LEED accreditations and stuff like that. And I thought I was buying a pretty green vehicle that was helping the environment.
That's not right with you. I mean, I would totally be on the same page as you were. I mean, but what was your first reaction when you heard the news about the scandal? I mean, it was big, it was huge.
Yeah, at first I honestly didn't pay any attention to it. I only had about 100,000 miles in the car, so I figured I still had 5 or 6 years left on it, and it didn't seem like the deal. And then about a week into it, you started realizing through just mass media how this was a big deal and they weren't going to get away with it type of a thing. So it was actually kind of interesting because I thought, although it was highly unethical, it was an ingenious type of a solution to get around this testing.
It was. And in your opinion, ever change when, if it did, at some point?
Yeah, so the thing that became pretty clear right away is that it was a larger problem than just this, a couple cars. It was hundreds of thousands of cars, and there was a financial impact of what was going to happen. They were going to ban these cars from being on the road, and they stopped selling them. And then you started realizing, okay, well, there's no secondary market for these vehicles anymore. So what am I going to do? Am I going to be forbidden from actually driving the thing? How can I resell it? Things like that came into my mind.
Of course, yeah. Well, you start to pay more attention, I assume. And what was Volkswagen's response to you as a customer? How do you feel about their response to you personally?
Well, I mean, they had, at first they tried to throw out the message that the cars were safe to drive, which is kind of funny because it's safe to drive from a consumer standpoint. It's not going to explode, it's not going to blow up or anything like that, but it wasn't necessarily safe for the environment, obviously. So the thing that I kept going back to was, what was I going to do with this diesel engine that is being banned, essentially?
Did Volkswagen provided frequent updates to you? They keep you in the loop about what's going on? Did you feel informed?
No, they kind of had their standard boilerplate stuff, where they would, you had to kind of register at a website and then they would start providing the information, but it was very sporadic. The majority of the information actually came from like car enthusiast websites, people that were following it because they owned them. They seem to have better and more updated information. All Volkswagen really said was that, hey, we've set aside, these billions of dollars to make the situation right.
Right. Any other issues? I mean, anything else came up during the case?
Well, the whole time they said that they were looking to try to fix the problem. And as engineers started looking at the issue, they started realizing that certain cars, like the Jetta in particular, it's a small car. And the solution to this whole thing was adding it's an additive product that helps get rid of nitric oxide. And you have to literally physically add something to the car, and the Jetta frame just wasn't big enough. So right away it became pretty clear that whatever their solution wasn't actually feasible for certain vehicles.
Right.
So then you started thinking, okay, well, are they actually going to buy this thing back from me? And then, I've never seen something on that scale. So as a consumer, I was like, is this actually going to happen?
Of course, right. Total sense. I mean, did you have any change on your driving habits after any change at all?
No. It was more about I didn't have a choice. I only owned one vehicle, so I just kept driving it. What I started doing was paying more attention to the actual court transcripts. They didn't televise this at all from California, so a couple hours after the testimony, I'd go on and download these giant PDFs and start scrolling through them to try to figure out what were they trying to do.
Well, I've heard that the scandal was first announced in mid 2015, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it was approved in June 2016, which is kind of the year after, and rolled out for execution in October of the same year, 2016, with compensation coming almost 18 months after the discovery. How was that way for you? How did you feel?
Just super uneasy. You didn't know kind of really what was going on. Once they actually came out and said, hey, they came out with certain PDF documents and tables that said you could figure out based on the year of your car and how much mileage you have, how much you were going to get in the buyback program. And at that point, all they really required was that the engine was running, that you could physically get it to a dealer. So what I ended up doing is I put the thing in my garage and ended up buying a different vehicle and just sat on it until the program actually went into effect in, like you said, late October 2016.
Right. In the end, what kind of compensation you received? Was it monetary? How do you feel? Do you think it was fair, adequate?
Sure. So the first thing they did is right away they did what was called the Goodwill package, which was like a $500 gift card, Visa gift card that you can use anywhere, and they gave you $500 to use at a dealer, which actually helped because their maintenance costs are ridiculous. And they also gave you like 3 years roadside assistance and stuff like that. When the buyback program went into effect, my car was worth about a little less than $7,000, and with the buyback, they ended up offering me close to $15,000. So financially, for me, I basically rented a car for 4 years for $10,000. So it ended up working out pretty good for me in terms of that. Not great for the environment, but good for me. So it seemed fair from a compensation standpoint.
Fair enough. And after all happened, your thoughts on Volkswagen as a company post-scandal? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think, I have a background in engineering, and the type of what they did to defeat this software was pretty interesting. It was an engineering solution, so it was interesting that they did this, but I feel like they learned their lesson. Some of their advertisements as of late have been pushing newer technologies, and they've invested a lot in solar or photovoltaic and things like that. So the biggest thing for me was just having them make it right as best they could.
Right. Well, you stated you were happy with the buyback, and you gave me your opinion on Volkswagen. Would you ever buy another Volkswagen again?
Probably not. I think they learned their lesson. It cost them a ton of money. Their stock price went down tremendously. I don't think if something like this were to happen again, that they could recover as a company. But that being said, the German engineering is great. It's just, you can't go down to the AutoZone and fix your own car like this. So for the maintenance aspects, probably try to stay away.
Well, thank you very, very much for your time and all that information. It's really, really helpful. Thank you.